Welcome to GTR West Africa 2021 Virtual. I'm Ted George, founder and chief narrative officer of Kleos Advisory, and I'm delighted to be involved again in this year's conference. In this welcome video, I will let you know what to expect from the conference and the digital platform, and I will give a short keynote on the outlook for trade and trade finance in the region. We all look forward to meeting in person in the near future, but for now we are fully digital. And GTR have developed a platform that gets the most out of this format. Please watch the demo of the conference platform which accompanies this video. This shows how to personalize the agenda to your own calendar and how to connect with speakers, attendees, and our sponsors who will have virtual stands in the sponsor hub. The conference includes a mix of pre-recorded sessions such as this welcome video and live panel discussions. For the live panels, we welcome your questions. Please submit them via the Q&A button, and the moderators will answer as many as they can in the time they have. Once each live session is over, you can continue your engagement in the speaker chat rooms. You will be directed to these after each session. All sessions from the conference will be available on demand on this platform afterwards. So if you miss a session, you can catch up at your leisure. Please make sure to fill in the event evaluation form. There's a button for that on the landing page. And why not take the GTR Challenge, which is another incentive to use the GTR platform as much as possible. For every virtual stand you visit, you get GTR Challenge points, so don't hold back. Whoever wins this challenge will get an Apple Watch, and the winner will be announced at the end of the conference. So, what do we have in GTR West Africa 2021? On day one, we have a mix of live and pre-recorded sessions, including a keynote by Raja Khan on the prospects for West Africa's economic recovery, panels on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, West Africa's oil sector, trade finance and development finance, and the digitalization of trade. On day two, I'll be moderating a live discussion on the outlook for West Africa's soft commodity sector. There are case studies on warehouse receipt financing and delivering healthcare infrastructure with ECA financing, as well as panels on structured and synthetic LCs and ECA financing. All times in the agenda are West Africa time zone, which is GMT +1. I hope you can join as many of these sessions as possible. And now, to set the scene, I'd like to give a short presentation, taking the pulse of West African trade and trade finance, and looking at some of the challenges and opportunities ahead of us. Many of these issues will be discussed during the conference. So how has West African trade fared during COVID-19? Well, the reality is COVID has impacted everyone across West Africa, regardless of where you're from. The evidence to date suggests that coronavirus is not as infectious in West Africa as other regions, for example, Europe or North America. And there's a number of reasons for this. One is the age of the population. Around half the population is under the age of 25, and coronavirus tends to badly affect those over 50 or 60. Then there's the fact that most West Africans spend a lot of their lives outdoors in the sunshine. This again is good for reducing transmission. But that doesn't mean that there hasn't been an impact. We have seen a Nigerian variant of the coronavirus emerge, and we have seen hospitalizations and deaths. In terms of the impact on people's lives, we haven't seen the crunching lockdown that they had in South Africa, but we have seen a lot of restrictions. Curfews put on in the night between specific hours, restrictions on travel and on how people can meet together. And even though there have been a lot of attempts to get people to wear masks and to practice social distancing, as the photograph on the bottom left shows, it's not always possible to do this when you have very tightly packed markets. But in my own view, I think if there's any region of Africa which is well designed for dealing with a pandemic, it is West Africa. We only have to go back to the last decade to see how they effectively contained Ebola, to see that there is residual memory there as well, and networks who can deal with the impact of COVID. And so far, I think West Africa has done a very good job. But the one area where COVID has had an impact that is beyond the control of West Africa is in trade flows. And this really reflects the changes in international demand. If you look at the chart on the left there with data from Intracen, you can see that bilateral trade for the region was actually growing in the 3 years up to 2019 to around $80 billion. But even then, the regional trade deficit was starting to widen, reaching around $6.5 billion in 2019. And it's likely that it got a lot worse in 2020 during the worst of the pandemic. The latest metrics available from the IMF, which look at the trade balance on goods as a percentage of GDP, the chart on the right, show how the impact of COVID has been varied depending on the country. If you look at somewhere like Ghana, it appears to have mostly ridden out the storm and in fact is expected to see a surge in its trade this year. Côte d'Ivoire has fluctuated strongly and Nigeria has effectively fallen off the cliff, moving sharply into deficit in 2020, and even this year is expected to remain in deficit, although there will be some recovery. A strong rebound in trade is forecast in 2021, reflecting a surge or recovery in trade and demand in the key markets for Africa, the EU and China. And the EU and China have definitely retained their dominance as the most important trade partners for West Africa. There are bilateral trade flows with the EU of around $61 billion a year. And there are also very important inter-regional flows, around $36 billion back in 2019, which shows that ECOWAS already has quite a high degree of integration compared to other regions of Africa. But we've also seen a real rise in the importance of China and India as trade partners. Over the past decade, China's bilateral flows have grown by 150% to around $33 billion. India's have risen by around 68% to $22 billion. But in stark contrast, US bilateral trade has shrunk by 71% over the same period. And this predominantly reflects the slump in exports of Nigerian crude to the US as a consequence of domestic shale oil production, which has slashed demand for Nigerian crude imports. The big problem and the spanner in the works for increasing trade any further is the trade finance gap, and it remains immense, estimated at around $120 billion a year for Africa. And it's even worse for interregional trade. Only around 70% of that gets available trade finance, which means repeatedly we see SMEs and small traders getting rejected for requests for trade finance, and this is clogging up the system. There are a number of reasons for this, and none of these are supplies. One of them is liquidity. This is particularly a problem during the stressful times of COVID. Asset credit worthiness of borrowers is another one. If you don't really know who it is you're lending to, you can't lend to them. And of course, the balance sheet limits of confirming banks. Because of some of the de-risking which has occurred in recent years, and in fact, due to COVID, there are fewer banks out there to confirm LCs, and all of this is choking off available trade finance. It is an endemic problem. In my entire time looking at Africa, I haven't seen these numbers shift much at all. And I think in this conference, we're going to be discussing a number of different ways that we can address this trade finance gap and get the finance to where it is needed. But going on in the background of COVID, and something that has been missed by a number of people, is that over the past year, Africa has passed a very significant digital tipping point. According to GSMA, this year, over half of the population will not only have a mobile phone, they will have access to 3G. You can see that in the statistics there on the left from the ITU. Mobile phone subscriptions over the last 15 years have grown from around 100 million to over 850 million now. But more significantly, 3G coverage, which was practically zero 10 years ago, is on a par with mobile phones. And what that really means is nowadays, if you're an African, you have a mobile phone, you probably have access to 3G. Handsets are becoming cheaper and easier to get. That photograph there is of a techno handset on sale in Lagos. And because of this, it means that there are now the possibilities of delivering any number of financial services to ordinary West Africans via their mobile phone. This is helping increase demand, helping increase commerce, and also driving demand for the commodities which are being traded in the region. The rapid increase in digital adoption in West Africa is also helping nurture the emergence of some of the most dynamic innovators in the continent. West Africa, and in particular Nigeria, is the single largest innovation hub in the developing world outside China. There are over 100 fintech platforms in Lagos state alone. This map from Brighter Bridges shows you the variety of innovations out there. Everything from e-wallets and mobile payment solutions to fintech support, crowdfunding and savings, blockchain, crypto. Some of the names on this list here may already be familiar to you. One or two are unicorns. Quite a few others, I think, will become familiar over the coming years, because as this digital adoption has enabled people to connect to the digital economy, demand for services is rising, and there is so much unmet demand out there and homegrown innovation which is seeking to address it. This feeds through into trade tech and into the trade finance space, and there will be a session which is specifically looking at financial innovation in trade and how this is helping increase flows and increase financing. And then there is the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. We have been talking about this for a number of years, but it has finally come into force on the 1st of January this year. The reality is the process of integrating all African countries into a single market is going to be long and complex. It was never going to occur overnight. But the idea of knitting together a continent-wide trade area is entirely feasible. If you look at this map here of existing trade blocs before the AFCFTA, you can see that we have ECOWAS in West Africa, we have COMESA covering the eastern seaboard of Africa, SADC dominated by South Africa in the south, and the EAC sandwiched between them. Linking these together is not necessarily so difficult, particularly as Central Africa is also part of the CFA Franc zone, which links it to the Francophone countries in West Africa. And in fact, there could be a similar approach adopted as what was used to knit together the European Community and eventually the European Union, which took a number of existing trade blocs and brought them together. It is inevitable that there will be disruption when this is occurring. We not only have certain border closures owing to COVID, but there is certain resistance from vested sectors in different countries. But the benefits are overwhelming, and we're already starting to see some sign of increase in interregional flows. Where I see the real opportunity is really in 3 areas. The first is to legalize billions of dollars of informal trade flows. Anyone who's been to the border between Benin and Nigeria, between Togo and Ghana, will see the level of informal trade which is flowing through there. And the fact is that overnight, a lot of this trade will become legal. This actually offers a huge opportunity to stamp out fraud and rent seeking at the ports, at the borders, and all along the trade value chain. It's often said that informal traders don't pay any taxes, but they do. They pay informal taxes, bribes and shakedowns. With a much clearer path and no physical borders, there's the opportunity to have a much more efficient intra-regional value chain. But for me, the real key and the real opportunity of the AFCFTA is this ability to build cross-border value chains in Africa. We have huge soft commodity production and huge wastage. If you take the case of Nigeria, it's the largest producer of cassava in the world, the largest producer of tomatoes in Africa, and yet over half of the crop every year rots because it can't get to market. A lot of it actually has to be sold in Nigeria. Now, with the removal of physical borders, there's the opportunity to semi-process soft commodities in Nigeria and then export them to neighboring countries where they can be finished and then turned into their final products. This is really the biggest opportunity of the AFCFTA, because so much of the commodity sector in the past has been about producing raw commodities and exporting them to the West, where they're not only consumed, but where all of the value is extracted. If there is an opportunity to start serving regional markets and regional demand, then Africa can really get not only more value out of its commodities, but it can also get some pricing power as well and decide whether it wants to export internationally or whether to serve the regional markets. This is the real opportunity, and I think over the coming months and years, we're going to see the emergence of these real cross-border value chains, which can bring great value to all of the countries included in them. Well, that's all for now. I look forward to seeing all of you online at GTR West Africa Virtual, and I encourage you to engage on the platform. We want this conference to be as interactive as possible. If you'd like to get in touch with me about any of the issues discussed today, I can be reached via the conference platform or on LinkedIn. Enjoy the conference.